Daniel Archer's phone buzzed at exactly 2:17 on a Thursday afternoon while he was reviewing quarterly projections in his home office. The message from his wife Jennifer read like casual news but landed with the weight of something rehearsed. "Greg's taking me to Maui next weekend. Finally using those vacation days. Don't worry about dinner plans." Daniel read it 3 times, not because the words were complicated, but because they arrived without the usual preamble that 15 years of marriage had trained him to expect. No "what do you think" or "is that okay" or even the courtesy of a question mark. Just a statement delivered like a weather update, flat and final. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He set his phone face down on the desk and stared at the spreadsheet in front of him, numbers that suddenly meant nothing. Greg Mitchell was Jennifer's manager at the consulting firm where she'd worked for the past 8 years. Daniel had met him twice at company holiday parties, a man who laughed too loud and stood too close, the kind of person who confused confidence with competence. The fact that Greg had a first-name basis in a text about Hawaii felt like a door that had been left open long enough for someone to walk through it. Daniel's pulse didn't race. Instead, something colder settled in his chest, the recognition that arrives when patterns finally form a picture you've been avoiding. The thing about being 43 years old and working in commercial real estate development is that Daniel had learned to read between lines that weren't even printed yet. He knew how investors hedged, how partners tested boundaries, how deals that seemed straightforward often had clauses buried in appendices that changed everything. Marriage, he discovered over a decade and a half, operated on similar principles. You paid attention to what wasn't said as much as what was. Jennifer hadn't mentioned this trip before today. Not during their Sunday morning coffee routine, not when they'd discussed their daughter Emma's upcoming field trip, not even last night when they'd watched television in that comfortable silence that long marriages either perfect or endure. Daniel pushed back from his desk and walked to the kitchen, filling a glass with water he didn't really want. The house felt too quiet for 2:15 on a weekday afternoon. Emma was at school. Jennifer was supposedly at work. He was supposed to be calculating ROI on a strip mall renovation in Scottsdale. Instead, he found himself opening his laptop at the kitchen island and typing into the search bar with the deliberate calm of someone checking facts rather than feeding paranoia. Maui resorts. Vacation packages. Flight schedules from Phoenix to Kahului. The searches felt clinical, like he was researching a property acquisition rather than his wife's sudden announcement of a tropical getaway with her boss. Daniel had always prided himself on being rational, on not being the kind of man who jumped to conclusions or made scenes. His father had been a mortgage broker who'd taught him that emotion was expensive and facts were free. But facts, Daniel was learning, could cost you something else entirely. They could cost you the story you've been telling yourself about your own life. He pulled up their shared credit card account, the one they used for household expenses and occasional splurges. No charges for flights. No hotel bookings. No travel insurance or resort fees. That meant either Jennifer was paying for this separately, which raised its own questions, or Greg was covering it, which answered them. Daniel clicked through the last 3 months of statements with the focused attention he usually reserved for due diligence documents. Charges appeared that he'd glossed over in real time but that now arranged themselves into a narrative he didn't want to read. There was a dinner at Corso Italian Bistro on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago. Jennifer had texted that night saying she was grabbing takeout with a colleague to finish a client presentation. The receipt showed 2 entrees, an appetizer, a bottle of wine, and a dessert that cost more than their usual Friday date nights. 2 weeks before that, a lunch at the Garden Terrace, another upscale spot downtown, charged at $1:30 on a Wednesday. Jennifer had mentioned a working lunch that day, but working lunches in Daniel's experience involved sandwich platters in conference rooms, not Caesar salads with grilled salmon and glasses of Chardonnay itemized on receipts. He took screenshots of each charge, not because he'd decided what to do with them, but because his training told him documentation mattered. Evidence preserved was evidence available. As he scrolled further back, more pieces appeared. A boutique clothing store purchase for $340 on a Saturday afternoon when she'd said she was running errands. A spa visit charged as a package deal, massage and facial, on a day she'd claimed to be deep in spreadsheets at the office. Each transaction was small enough to slip past notice in the moment, but together they formed a pattern of time and money that didn't align with the calendar they'd been sharing. Daniel closed the laptop and carried his untouched water to the living room window. Outside, their neighborhood stretched in the comfortable sameness of suburban Phoenix, stucco houses with desert landscaping and SUVs in driveways. Families living their regular lives with regular problems. He wondered how many of them had stood at windows like this one, holding drinks they didn't want, watching the street while their understanding of their own marriage rearranged itself like furniture moved in the dark. The rational part of his brain, the part that had negotiated contracts and spotted zoning violations, told him not to overreact. There could be explanations. Corporate cards. Client entertainment. Misremembered details. But the other part, the part that had woken up to an increasingly distant wife over the past 6 months, knew better. Jennifer had been different lately in ways that were hard to articulate but impossible to ignore. She'd started taking her phone into the bathroom. She'd bought new perfume, something floral and expensive that she wore on workdays but not on weekends. Their intimacy had become scheduled and perfunctory, something checked off a list rather than shared with intent. She'd stopped asking about his projects, stopped offering details about hers, stopped existing in that overlapping space where partners actually lived together instead of just occupying the same address. The Maui text wasn't the beginning. It was just the first thing that had been impossible to misinterpret. Daniel set his glass on the side table and picked up his phone again. He scrolled to Jennifer's contact and hovered over the call button, but didn't press it. Confrontation without information was just noise. He'd seen enough bad negotiations to know that whoever walked into the room with better facts usually walked out with better terms. Instead, he opened his email and searched for confirmations, receipts, anything that might tell him what Jennifer had been planning and with whom. Nothing about Hawaii appeared in their shared inbox. He checked the spam folder, the promotions tab, even the trash. Blank. That meant she'd been careful, using a separate email account or deleting as she went. Daniel respected the thoroughness even as it confirmed what he already suspected. People didn't cover tracks unless they knew they were leaving them. He thought about the timeshare, the one his parents had purchased in Kihei 30 years ago and that had passed to him after his father died. Daniel had kept it mostly out of nostalgia, paying the maintenance fees and using it maybe once every other year for family trips that Emma half enjoyed and Jennifer half tolerated. The timeshare sat in a modest complex near the beach, nothing fancy but well maintained, with a small unit that slept 4 and had a kitchenette his mother had loved. Daniel had the ownership documents in a fireproof safe in the garage along with the deed to their house and Emma's birth certificate. He wondered if Jennifer even remembered it existed. They hadn't been to Maui together in 3 years, not since Emma had started middle school, and their vacations had shifted to shorter trips that fit around her volleyball schedule. The last time they'd used the timeshare, Jennifer had complained about the dated decor and the lack of room service. She'd wanted to stay at a resort. Daniel had promised they'd upgrade next time. Now someone else was taking her to Maui, presumably to one of those resorts she'd wanted. The irony wasn't lost on him. Neither was the opportunity. If Greg Mitchell was planning to impress Jennifer with a romantic Hawaiian getaway, he was about to discover that the island was smaller than he thought and that Daniel Archer had been there first. Not just as a visitor, but as someone with roots, with property, with documentation that could turn an affair into a very public, very expensive miscalculation. Daniel walked back to his office and pulled up the timeshare management company's website. He logged into the owner portal using credentials he had to look up because he accessed it so infrequently. The dashboard showed his unit, his reservation calendar, his maintenance fee history. He clicked on the guest register, a feature that allowed owners to see who was checking into their units if they'd rented them out through the management company. Daniel had never rented his unit. He'd kept it private, family only. But the management company, as part of its service package, also tracked nearby units and flagged when guests from your contact list appeared in the system. It was a feature designed for owners who wanted to coordinate visits with friends or family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel had set it up years ago and then forgotten about it. Now he updated his contact list to include one name, Greg Mitchell. He pulled Greg's information from Jennifer's rarely used iPad, which synced with her work contacts and which she'd left charging in the kitchen. Greg's email, his phone number, his emergency contact details all fed into the system. If Greg had booked a timeshare anywhere in the Kihei area, Daniel would know. If he'd booked a resort, Daniel could at least narrow down where they'd be. He felt like a detective in a procedural drama, except the crime hadn't technically happened yet and the victim was his own marriage. The absurdity of it struck him as he sat there cross-referencing travel sites and timeshare databases, but he didn't stop. There was something clarifying about taking action, about converting suspicion into data. His phone buzzed. Another text from Jennifer. Forgot to mention, leaving Friday morning. Back Tuesday. Can you handle Emma's pickup from volleyball? The casual tone of it, the assumption that he'd simply accommodate, felt like a slap delivered with a smile. Daniel typed back a single word, sure. He didn't add anything else. No questions, no pushback, no indication that anything was wrong. People in real estate learn that sometimes the best negotiating tactic was silence. Let the other party fill the void. Let them think they were in control. Then pull the foundation when they'd built too much on top of it. He spent the next hour mapping out a plan that felt equal parts rational and slightly unhinged. First, he'd continue gathering evidence. Not just credit card charges, but patterns of behavior, inconsistencies in her stories, anything that established a timeline. Second, he'd confirm the Hawaii trip details. If Greg had indeed booked something in Kihei, Daniel would know. If they were staying elsewhere on Maui, he'd figure out where. Third, he'd decide what to do with the information. Confront her before she left? Let her go and confront her when she returned? Contact Greg directly? File for divorce and let the lawyers sort it out? Each option had variables, consequences, emotional costs that Daniel couldn't fully calculate sitting in his home office on a Thursday afternoon. But what he could do was prepare. Document. Verify. People thought affairs were about passion and impulse, but Daniel was learning they were also about logistics. Flights booked, hotels reserved, excuses coordinated. If you could dismantle the logistics, you could expose the reality underneath. And Daniel was very good at logistics. He pulled up the Photos app on his phone and scrolled back through the last few months. There was Emma's birthday party in July, Jennifer smiling in pictures but checking her phone between shots. There was their anniversary dinner in August, a nice meal at a steakhouse where Jennifer had seemed distracted, looking past him at something or someone that wasn't there. There was Labor Day weekend when she'd claimed to have a work emergency and had spent 6 hours at the office on a Sunday, returning home with Starbucks that was still warm and an explanation that felt rehearsed. Daniel had accepted all of it at the time because that's what 15 years together had taught him to do. You gave your partner the benefit of the doubt. You assumed good intentions. You didn't audition for the role of suspicious spouse because it felt demeaning to both of you. Except now the doubt had compounded into certainty, and good intentions had given way to documented deception. He wasn't auditioning anymore. He was standing center stage in a production he hadn't known he was part of, reading lines from a script that had been written without his input. His laptop chimed with an email notification. The timeshare management portal had sent him an automated update. A new reservation had been flagged in his area. Greg Mitchell, party of 2, checking in Friday afternoon at the Maui Palms Resort, 3 miles from Daniel's timeshare. The room was an ocean view suite, 5 nights, charged to a corporate card. Daniel stared at the screen. The management company's system had worked exactly as designed, alerting him to the presence of someone from his contact list visiting the area during his ownership window. It was almost too perfect, too convenient, the kind of coincidence that felt like the universe providing ammunition. Or maybe it wasn't coincidence at all. Maybe this was just what happened when you paid attention, when you stopped accepting surface explanations and started looking at the foundation. Greg Mitchell hadn't even been subtle. Corporate card for a romantic getaway. Ocean view suite. The arrogance of it suggested he didn't think he'd get caught or didn't care if he did. Men like Greg, in Daniel's experience, operated with the confidence of people who'd never really faced consequences. Daniel screenshot the reservation details and added them to a folder on his desktop that he labeled simply Hawaii. Then he did something that surprised himself. He booked a flight. Phoenix to Maui, departing Saturday morning, returning Tuesday evening. He used his personal credit card, not the shared account. He booked a hotel in Wailea, far enough from Kihei to avoid accidentally running into Jennifer and Greg, close enough to drive over if he decided he needed to. The whole process took less than 10 minutes, a few clicks that committed him to a course of action he hadn't fully thought through but that felt necessary in a way he couldn't articulate. He wasn't planning to spy. He wasn't planning a confrontation on the beach. What he was planning, he realized, was to be present. To exist in the same physical space where his marriage was ending, even if Jennifer didn't know he was there. There was something symbolic about it, about not staying home and waiting for her to return with lies he'd be expected to accept. He was claiming territory. He was saying, without saying anything yet, that this wasn't happening in a vacuum. That her choices had witnesses and consequences and that he wasn't going to be a passive character in his own story. The flight confirmation arrived in his inbox. He printed it and added it to the Hawaii folder. Then he opened a new document and started writing down every inconsistency, every strange charge, every moment over the past 6 months that had felt off. The document grew to 3 pages, then 5. By the time Emma got home from school at 4:15, Daniel had created a timeline that would have impressed an investigative journalist. Names, dates, amounts, locations. The architecture of an affair laid out in Arial 12-point font. Emma bounced into the kitchen with her volleyball bag and a request for snacks that Daniel fulfilled on autopilot, slicing an apple and pouring juice while his daughter talked about her day. She mentioned a quiz in science, drama with a friend, plans for the weekend. Normal 13-year-old concerns delivered with the assumption that her parents' marriage was as stable as the house they lived in. Daniel envied her innocence even as he dreaded the moment when it would end. Divorce, when it came, would rearrange Emma's life in ways he couldn't fully protect her from. That knowledge sat in his chest like a weight. He asked about her volleyball schedule and confirmed he'd be picking her up on Monday. Emma asked where her mom was, and Daniel said work, which was probably true in the most technical sense. Then Emma went to her room to start homework, and Daniel returned to his office to stare at the timeline he'd built and the flight confirmation that represented either the worst decision or the most necessary one he'd made in years. Outside, the afternoon stretched into evening. The Phoenix heat settled into something almost tolerable. Daniel made dinner, served it, cleaned up, and went through the motions of a regular Thursday while his mind cataloged evidence and calculated next steps. Jennifer came home at 7:30, later than usual but not alarmingly so. She kissed Emma on the head, asked about homework, and then retreated to their bedroom to change. Daniel stayed in the kitchen, unloading the dishwasher with methodical precision. When Jennifer emerged in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, she poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter in a pose that used to feel intimate but now felt staged. "Long day?" Daniel asked, his tone neutral. "Exhausting," Jennifer said, taking a sip. "Clients freaking out about some audit. Greg and I have been putting out fires all week." Greg. The name dropped so casually into conversation, like it belonged there, like it was just another detail of her day. Daniel nodded, loading the last plate into the dishwasher. "Sounds stressful." "It is," she agreed. "That's why this Hawaii trip is perfect timing. I need to decompress." Daniel closed the dishwasher and turned to face her. She looked tired, he thought. Or maybe she looked like someone carrying a secret that was getting heavier by the day. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. A husband she was betraying? An obstacle to something she wanted? A person she used to love before love became complicated? "When's your flight?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Friday morning. Early. I'll probably leave here by 5 to beat traffic." "Greg going on the same flight?" A pause. Barely noticeable, but there. "Yeah," she said. "It's a work trip, technically. We're calling it a retreat. Team building." The lie was so smooth it was almost impressive. Daniel stored it with the others, another line in the document that was growing longer by the hour. "Sounds nice," he said. "Maui's beautiful this time of year." "Have you been?" Jennifer asked, and Daniel realized with a jolt that she'd forgotten. Forgotten the timeshare. Forgotten the family trips they'd taken to that exact island. Forgotten the sunset they'd watched from the lanai the year Emma was 7 and had spent the whole evening collecting seashells. Or maybe she hadn't forgotten. Maybe she was just betting he wouldn't mention it, that he'd stay in his lane and let her have her lie. "Once or twice," Daniel said, playing along. "It's nice. You'll have a good time." Jennifer smiled, relieved that the conversation had stayed surface level. "I hope so. I really need this." She took her wine to the living room, where Emma had migrated to watch a baking show. Daniel stayed in the kitchen, hands gripping the edge of the counter, breathing through the anger that wanted to announce itself. Not yet, he thought. Not until he knew exactly what he was dealing with and what he wanted to do about it. Timing mattered in negotiations. Leverage mattered. And right now, Jennifer thought she had both. The evening unfolded like dozens before it. Television, small talk, bedtime routines. Daniel kissed Emma goodnight and told her he loved her. Jennifer was already in their bedroom when he finally went upstairs, the door closed, the light off. He brushed his teeth in the guest bathroom and then went to his office under the pretense of finishing work emails. Instead, he opened the Hawaii folder and reviewed everything one more time. The credit card charges. The timeline. The timeshare reservation alert. His own flight confirmation. It was all there, a case file for a trial that hadn't started yet. Daniel saved everything to a cloud drive with a password Jennifer didn't know and then backed it up to a thumb drive he put in his desk drawer. Redundancy was important. Evidence could be deleted, accounts could be accessed, but multiple copies in multiple places meant the truth had options. He sat in the quiet of his office and thought about his parents. His father had been a steady man, reliable to the point of boring, who'd worked the same job for 35 years and had come home every night to the same woman and the same routines. Daniel had inherited that steadiness, that belief in showing up and doing the work and trusting that constancy had value. But his father had also taught him that contracts were only as good as the people signing them and that when someone stopped honoring their commitments, you protected yourself. Jennifer had stopped honoring her commitments. The wedding vows they'd made, the partnership they'd built, the family they were supposed to be protecting together. She decided that something else, someone else, was worth more. Daniel couldn't control that. But he could control how he responded. He could control what happened next. And what happened next, he was realizing, started with Hawaii. He turned off his computer and went to the guest bedroom, where he'd been sleeping more often lately under the excuse of not wanting to wake Jennifer when he worked late. The bed was smaller, the room less familiar, but it felt honest. He lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, and thought about the conversation they'd have when she returned from Maui. Or maybe before she left. Or maybe while she was there, on an island that was supposed to be her escape but that he'd turned into something else entirely. Sleep came eventually, fitful and interrupted by half-formed plans and scenarios that played out like negotiations in his head. By the time light filtered through the blinds on Friday morning, Daniel had made his decisions. He'd let Jennifer go to Hawaii. He'd follow on Saturday. And when the time was right, when he had everything he needed, he'd have the conversation that would end one version of their life and begin whatever came next. The thought didn't bring relief exactly, but it brought clarity. And clarity, he'd learned, was a form of power all its own. Jennifer was already up when Daniel emerged from the guest room at 5:30. She had her suitcase by the door, her carry-on packed with the efficiency of someone who traveled regularly. She was wearing travel clothes, comfortable but stylish, her hair pulled back, her makeup subtle. She looked like someone going to a business conference or a wellness retreat. She looked like someone's wife about to betray 15 years of marriage and not lose a minute of sleep over it. "You're up early," she said, surprised to see him. "Couldn't sleep," Daniel replied, which was true enough. "Wanted to see you off." Something in her face softened. Guilt, maybe. Or nostalgia for the version of them that used to care about goodbyes. She hugged him briefly, a gesture that felt obligatory rather than felt. "Take care of Emma," she said. "I left instructions on the counter. Volleyball schedule, dinner ideas, that kind of thing." "I've got it," Daniel assured her. "Have a safe flight." She grabbed her bags and headed for the garage. Daniel watched from the doorway as she loaded the car, as she backed out into the pre-dawn darkness, as her taillights disappeared down the street. Then he closed the door, locked it, and stood in the silence of a house that had just become a little less crowded and a lot more honest. Emma wouldn't be up for another hour. Daniel made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, reviewing the plans he'd made and the flight he'd be taking tomorrow. He felt calm in a way that surprised him, the kind of calm that comes from committing to a difficult course of action and trusting that you've done the preparation. Jennifer was on her way to Maui. So was Greg. And in less than 24 hours, so would Daniel. The island was about to get a lot more complicated for everyone involved. He thought about the timeshare, sitting there in Kihei with its dated furniture and its kitchenette and its memories of a family that used to take vacations together. He thought about his parents, who'd saved for years to buy that little piece of paradise and who'd believed in investments that lasted. He thought about Emma, asleep upstairs, who deserved parents who at least tried to do right by her even when their marriage was falling apart. And he thought about Jennifer, somewhere over Nevada by now probably, heading toward an island and a man and a decision she'd made without him. She'd been so careful, so calculated in her deception. But she'd forgotten one thing. She'd forgotten that Daniel Archer built his career on details, on research, on knowing the landscape before he made an offer. She'd forgotten that he owned property in paradise. And she was about to remember it in the worst possible way. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that desert cities offer without apology. Daniel had already been awake for 2 hours when his alarm went off at 4, his mind running through scenarios and contingencies like a computer processing background tasks. Emma was spending the weekend at her best friend Sophia's house, a sleepover that had been planned weeks ago and that now provided perfect cover for Daniel's impromptu trip. He'd told Emma he had a last-minute site visit in California, close enough to the truth to avoid elaborate lies, distant enough to explain his absence. The drive to Sky Harbor Airport felt surreal in its ordinariness. Traffic was light, the rental car return was efficient, and security moved faster than expected. Daniel found himself at his gate 45 minutes early, watching other travelers shuffle past with their roller bags and neck pillows, everyone heading somewhere with purposes he could only guess at. Some were probably going on vacation. Some visiting family. Some, like him, chasing something that couldn't be resolved over the phone or through intermediaries. He wondered how many of them were traveling toward confrontations they'd rehearsed in their heads but hadn't quite figured out how to execute. His flight boarded on time. Daniel had chosen a window seat, preferring the view to aisle access. As the plane climbed over the suburban grid of Phoenix and banked west toward the Pacific, he watched the city shrink into geometric patterns, subdivisions and shopping centers and golf courses arranged with the precision of someone's master plan. From 30,000 feet, everything looked intentional. It was only when you got closer that you saw the cracks, the spaces between what was planned and what actually happened. The flight attendant came by with drinks. Daniel ordered coffee he didn't need in a breakfast box he barely touched. The man next to him, a retiree in a Hawaiian shirt that was optimistic for 6 in the morning, tried to make conversation about whether this was Daniel's first time to the islands. Daniel offered polite deflections, claiming it was a work trip, which the retiree accepted with a knowing nod before returning to his thriller novel. Work trip was easier than the truth. Easier than explaining he was flying to Maui to confront his wife about an affair she didn't know he knew about. 5 hours passed in that strange compression of airplane time where everything happens and nothing does. Movies he didn't watch, meals he didn't taste, turbulence over the ocean that the pilot assured them was routine. Daniel spent most of the flight staring at the tiny screen embedded in the seat back, not really seeing whatever program was playing, his thoughts circling the same questions. What would he say when he saw her? Would he confront her directly or observe from a distance first? Was he doing this for closure or revenge or some combination of both that he hadn't admitted to himself yet? The descent into Maui began with the captain's announcement and the familiar pressure change that made his ears pop. Through the window, the island emerged from clouds like a photograph developing in reverse. Green mountains, white beaches, turquoise water that looked fake in its perfection. Daniel had been here before, years ago with Jennifer and Emma, back when family vacations meant something beyond logistics and scheduling. They'd snorkeled at Molokini, driven the road to Hana, eaten shave ice that stained Emma's mouth blue. Those memories felt like they belonged to different people now, a family that existed in photographs but not in the present tense. The plane touched down with a gentle thump. The cabin erupted in the scattered applause that always puzzled Daniel, people celebrating pilots for doing their job. He gathered his carry-on from the overhead bin and filed off with everyone else, into the open-air terminal that smelled like plumeria and felt 10 degrees warmer than Phoenix despite being surrounded by ocean. The humidity hit him immediately, that tropical weight that made clothes stick and breathing feel like work. He collected his rental car, a mid-size sedan that was anonymous enough to avoid attention, and programmed the GPS for his hotel in Wailea. The drive south took him along the coast, past resort properties and vacation rentals and stretches of volcanic rock that reminded visitors this island had been born from violence. Daniel kept his speed reasonable, his attention split between the road and the scenery he wasn't really processing. His mind was already in Kihei, 3 miles north of where he was heading, where Jennifer and Greg were presumably settling into their ocean view suite and believing they'd gotten away with something. The hotel in Wailea was nicer than Daniel had intended to book, a property that catered to honeymooners and wealthy retirees with infinity pools and restaurants that didn't list prices on menus. He'd chosen it partially for its distance from Kihei and partially because some part of him wanted to prove he could afford the same luxury Jennifer was enjoying with someone else. Petty, maybe, but honest. The front desk clerk, a woman named Leilani with flowers in her hair and a practiced smile, welcomed him with the standard island greeting and handed him a key card and a folder decorated with tropical fish. His room was on the 4th floor with a partial ocean view that cost extra but delivered. Daniel dropped his bag on the bed and stood at the sliding glass door, looking out at the water that stretched impossibly blue toward a horizon he couldn't see. Somewhere north of here, Jennifer was looking at a similar view. Somewhere in this absurd situation, there was supposed to be clarity about what happened next. But standing in a hotel room he'd booked on impulse, Daniel felt only the weight of decisions that seemed inevitable but not yet defined. He showered and changed into clothes that felt appropriate for the climate but wrong for his mood. Shorts and a polo shirt, the uniform of tourists who were here to relax rather than detonate their marriages. His phone showed 2 texts from Emma, already sent from Sophia's house, asking if he'd landed and whether California was fun. Daniel replied with reassurances and emojis, the digital shorthand of parenting when you were lying about your location. Then he opened the browser on his phone and pulled up the address for the Maui Palms resort where Greg had booked their room. The drive to Kihei took 18 minutes. Daniel found the resort easily, a sprawling property that marketed itself as boutique luxury but looked like most mid-range vacation hotels he'd seen. Palm trees, a circular driveway, valet parking that he declined in favor of self-parking in a lot that gave him options for quick exits. He sat in his car for several minutes, engine off, windows down, trying to decide what exactly he was doing here. Reconnaissance felt like the generous term. Stalking was probably more accurate. But he'd come this far, and turning back now felt like cowardice rather than wisdom. The resort lobby was open air, designed to blur the line between inside and outside, with fans slowly rotating overhead and staff members in matching aloha shirts greeting guests with leis and offers of mai tais. Daniel walked through like he belonged there, like he was just another guest enjoying the amenities. No one stopped him. No one asked for a room key. Security in resort properties, he'd learned from years of site visits, was more theater than substance. People assumed if you looked comfortable, you had a right to be there. He found the pool area, a lagoon-style design with a waterfall feature and a swim-up bar where tourists perched on submerged stools drinking things that came with umbrellas. Daniel scanned the crowd from behind sunglasses he'd put on more for camouflage than sun protection. Families with kids, couples on loungers, a bachelorette party that was already too loud for 3 in the afternoon. No sign of Jennifer or Greg, but the resort was large enough that they could be anywhere. Beach, room, restaurant, spa. Finding them would require either luck or surveillance that crossed lines Daniel wasn't sure he wanted to cross. He ordered a beer at the poolside bar, more to justify his presence than from any desire to drink. The bartender, a local guy with tattoos covering both arms, made small talk about where Daniel was from and how long he was staying. Daniel offered vague answers, maintaining the fiction that he was here for business mixed with pleasure. The beer was cold and mostly wasted. Daniel nursed it for 20 minutes while his eyes tracked every person who emerged from the building or walked past on the beach path. Then he saw them. Jennifer first, wearing a sundress Daniel had never seen before, white with small yellow flowers, the kind of outfit that looked expensive and effortless. Her hair was down, longer than he remembered, catching the light as she walked. And next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched, was Greg Mitchell. He looked exactly as Daniel remembered from the holiday parties, tall and fit in that way that suggested gym memberships and meal planning, wearing board shorts and a linen shirt that was unbuttoned just enough to be trying. They were laughing about something, Jennifer's hand briefly touching Greg's arm in a gesture that was either casual or intimate depending on how you interpreted it. Daniel felt his pulse accelerate, that fight-or-flight response that evolution had wired into humans long before resort pools and Mai Tais. He set his beer down and watched them claim 2 loungers near the far end of the pool, away from the families and closer to the adult section that the resort marketed as a tranquil escape. Greg said something that made Jennifer laugh again, that genuine laugh she used to save for moments that mattered, and then he went back inside, presumably to get drinks or towels or whatever prop their performance required next. Jennifer settled into her chair, adjusting the back to catch the sun, pulling sunglasses from her bag and a book she didn't open. Daniel watched her from across the pool, this woman he'd been married to for 15 years, who'd packed his lunches and attended his company dinners and shared a mortgage and a child and a life that apparently wasn't enough. She looked content. Relaxed in a way she never seemed at home, where every interaction felt weighted with unspoken tension. Here, with her boss/lover buying drinks while she sunbathed at a resort, she looked like someone who'd made a choice and was enjoying it. Something cold settled in Daniel's chest then, not anger exactly but a kind of crystalline resolve. He'd known intellectually that Jennifer was having an affair. He'd seen the evidence, tracked the charges, followed the digital breadcrumbs. But knowing and seeing were different animals. Seeing her here, comfortable in someone else's company, made the abstraction concrete. This wasn't a mistake she was agonizing over. This was a decision she'd made and was actively choosing, poolside drinks and all. Greg returned with 2 cocktails, something tropical with fruit garnishes. He handed one to Jennifer and sat on the edge of her lounger, close enough that their legs touched. They clinked glasses. They smiled at each other with the ease of people who'd done this before, who had inside jokes and shared references that Daniel wasn't part of. He watched them for another 5 minutes, documenting the scene in his mind even though he wasn't sure what he'd do with the information. Then he stood, left money for his beer, and walked out of the resort before the anger that was building in his throat could translate into action he'd regret. The drive back to Wailea was a blur of muscle memory and suppressed fury. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his jaw clenched, his mind replaying the image of Jennifer touching Greg's arm, of them laughing, of them existing in a space where Daniel was irrelevant. By the time he pulled into his hotel parking lot, he'd cycled through rage, hurt, calculation, and back to rage. He sat in the car with the engine off, breathing deliberately, trying to find the version of himself that made rational decisions instead of emotional ones. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer: "Made it safely. Hotel is beautiful. Missing you and Emma." The audacity of it, the casual lie delivered with emojis, made Daniel want to throw his phone across the parking lot. Instead, he typed back, "Glad you're safe. Enjoy the retreat." Let her think he believed the fiction. Let her think she was getting away with it. The satisfaction of revealing the truth would be worth the delay. He went up to his room and paced for 15 minutes, too wired to sit still, too uncertain to act. The rational part of his brain, the part that had built a career on measured decisions, told him to wait. Gather more information. Confirm beyond doubt what he already knew. But the other part, the part that had just watched his wife flirt with another man at a resort pool, wanted immediate confrontation. Wanted to walk back to that hotel, find their room, and force the conversation that would end this limbo. Instead, Daniel did what he trained himself to do in moments of high emotion. He made a list. He pulled out his laptop and opened a document, typing out everything he knew and everything he needed to confirm. Flight records, hotel reservations, credit card charges, witness accounts. If this ended in divorce court, and it almost certainly would, he wanted documentation that was airtight. Judges didn't care about feelings. They cared about facts. And Daniel was going to provide facts that left no room for interpretation. The document grew to 4 pages. By the time he finished, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in colors that would have been romantic under different circumstances. Daniel ordered room service because eating felt necessary even though he had no appetite. A burger that tasted like cardboard and fries he forced himself to finish while watching the local news without absorbing a single story. His mind kept circling back to the pool, to Jennifer's laugh, to the ease with which she'd lied to him via text message while sitting next to the man she was cheating with. He called Emma before bed, keeping his tone light, asking about her day with Sophia, confirming pickup times for Sunday evening. Emma chattered about movies they'd watched and snacks they'd eaten, oblivious to the fact that her father was lying about being in California and her mother was lying about being at a work retreat. The innocence in her voice made Daniel's chest ache. Whatever happened between him and Jennifer, Emma would be collateral damage. That knowledge sat heavy as he said goodnight and ended the call. Sleep was theoretical that night. Daniel lay in the too comfortable hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to muffled conversations from neighboring rooms and the distant sound of waves against the shore. His mind played out scenarios, conversations, legal strategies. By 3 a.m, he'd mentally drafted his opening statement for a divorce lawyer, calculated the likely asset split, and imagined 6 different versions of the confrontation that was coming. None of them felt satisfying. All of them felt necessary. Sunday morning brought rain, unexpected and heavy, the kind that turned resort activities into indoor affairs. Daniel ate breakfast in the hotel restaurant, eggs and coffee he consumed mechanically while watching other couples enjoy their vacations. An older pair by the window, holding hands across the table. A younger couple with a toddler, managing chaos with practiced efficiency. All of them. Living versions of marriage that apparently worked, or at least worked better than his. He drove back to Kihei mid-morning, the rain providing cover for his presence. The resort parking lot was fuller now, rental cars with mud flaps from different agencies crowding every available space. Daniel parked in a spot that gave him a view of the main entrance and settled in to wait, feeling absurd and justified in equal measure. He wasn't sure what he expected to see or what he'd do with the information, but being here felt more productive than sitting in his hotel room practicing speeches. An hour passed. The rain slowed to drizzle. Daniel watched guests come and go, families heading to late breakfasts, couples returning from morning walks. Then Greg emerged, alone, wearing running clothes and earbuds, heading toward the beach path that the resort marketed as perfect for joggers. Daniel watched him disappear around a corner and made a decision that was either brilliant or criminally stupid. He got out of his car and walked into the resort. The lobby was busy with checkout activity, guests settling bills and arranging transportation. Daniel moved through with purpose, heading for the elevators like he knew exactly where he was going. No one stopped him. No one questioned his presence. He pressed the button for the 4th floor, the number he'd glimpsed on Greg's keycard folder the previous afternoon when he'd watched them at the pool. The hallway was generic resort design, neutral carpeting and artwork that depicted local flora in colors that were cheerful and meaningless. Daniel walked slowly, checking door numbers, trying to remember the exact room he'd noted. For 17, he stopped in front of it, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. The Do Not Disturb sign hung from the handle. He could hear nothing from inside, no television, no voices, just the ambient hum of air conditioning that all hotels shared. He stood there for a full minute, debating. Knocking would force an immediate confrontation with Jennifer, Greg, or both. It would eliminate any pretense, any possibility of strategic retreat. But it would also give him answers in real time rather than waiting for the carefully constructed versions Jennifer would offer later. Daniel raised his hand, held it inches from the door, and then lowered it. Not yet. Not like this. He needed control of the conversation, and surprising her in a hotel room while her lover was out jogging wasn't control. It was chaos. He turned and walked back to the elevator, passing a housekeeper who smiled politely and continued pushing her cart. Back in the lobby, Daniel felt the adrenaline drain, leaving behind exhaustion and something that felt like defeat. He'd come here to confront the situation, but confrontation required more than presence. It required strategy. And standing in hotel hallways wasn't strategy. It was desperation dressed as action. He drove back to Wailea through rain that had resumed with tropical intensity. His hotel room felt smaller than before, the walls closing in with the weight of decisions unmade and conversations pending. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos of Emma, of family trips, of a life that looked functional from the outside but had been hollowing from within. He thought about his parents' timeshare, sitting and used a few miles north, a property that represented their belief in the future and their investment in family continuity. That's when the idea formed, not fully conceived but present enough to feel like possibility. The timeshare. His property, his name on the deed, his reservation rights. If Jennifer and Greg wanted to enjoy Maui, they could do it knowing that Daniel owned a piece of the island they thought was their private escape. The symmetry of it appealed to him, the way good business deals did when all parties realized the leverage wasn't distributed the way they'd assumed. He opened his laptop and pulled up the timeshare management portal. His unit was available, had been available all week because he never rented it out and hadn't planned any personal visits. But availability meant access. It meant he could show up, claim his property, use it as a base of operations that was both legitimate and strategic. More than that, it meant he could extend an invitation. Not to Greg, obviously, but to the situation itself. A reminder that he wasn't an absent player in this drama. He was very much present, very much aware, and very much holding cards that Jennifer hadn't accounted for. Daniel spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a message. Not a text, which would be too easy to dismiss or ignore. An email, formal and carefully worded, the kind of communication that established tone and intent. He wrote it on hotel letterhead he printed from the business center, because physical documents carried weight that digital ones didn't. The message was simple: Jennifer, I know about Maui. I know about Greg. I own property here. We need to talk. Room 247, Kihei Breeze Timeshare. I'll be there Monday morning. Come alone. He read it over a dozen times, adjusting phrasing, removing anything that sounded like pleading or rage. The final version was clinical, factual, undeniable. He saved it to his drafts folder but didn't send it. Not yet. Timing mattered, and sending it too early would give Jennifer time to construct defenses or flee entirely. He'd wait until Monday morning, let her enjoy one more day of believing she'd succeeded in her deception, then pull the foundation. The rain stopped late afternoon, giving way to one of those post-storm sunsets that tourists paid premium prices to photograph. Daniel stood on his balcony watching colors bleed across the sky, thinking about timing and leverage in the ways that real estate principles applied to marriage. Location mattered. Documentation mattered. And ownership, it turned out, was everything. He'd spent 15 years building a life with Jennifer, investing in a partnership that should have appreciated over time. Instead, she'd been depreciating the asset while he'd continued maintenance payments. Monday would change the equation. Monday would be the inspection that revealed structural damage. And unlike most inspections, this one would have immediate consequences. Daniel went to bed early Sunday night, setting multiple alarms, preparing for a morning that would require clarity and resolve. He'd made his decision. Now he just needed to execute it with the precision his career had taught him and his marriage apparently required. The timeshare management company opened at 7. Daniel called from his hotel room while coffee brewed, identifying himself as the owner and requesting immediate access to his unit for personal use. The woman on the phone, friendly in that professional island way, confirmed his reservation and said housekeeping would prepare the unit within the hour. He could pick up keys at the office anytime after 8. Daniel thanked her, ended the call, and opened his email to the draft he'd prepared. He read it one final time. Jennifer, I know about Maui. I know about Greg. I own property here. We need to talk. Room 247, Kihei Breeze Timeshare. I'll be there Monday morning. Come alone. 16 words that would detonate whatever remained of their marriage. His finger hovered over the send button, that final moment before irreversible action. Then he pressed it. The message disappeared from his drafts and entered the digital ether, traveling across servers and satellites to reach Jennifer's inbox in whatever room she was waking up in. Daniel showered and dressed in clothes that felt appropriate for the conversation ahead. Not vacation casual but not business formal either. Jeans and a button-down, the uniform of serious intent without aggression. He checked out of the Wailea Hotel, thanking the front desk staff who wished him a pleasant rest of his trip. Then he drove north to Kihei, to the timeshare complex his parents had purchased 3 decades ago, to the property that was about to become the setting for a confrontation he'd been building toward since Thursday afternoon. The Kihei Breeze was exactly as he remembered it from their last visit 3 years ago. 2-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard with a modest pool and barbecue grills. Not luxury but comfortable, the kind of place families returned to year after year because consistency mattered more than novelty. Daniel parked and walked to the management office, where a different woman than the one he'd spoken with on the phone greeted him with a lei and a folder containing his keys. Unit 247 was on the 2nd floor, accessed by an exterior staircase that smelled like salt air and flowering vines. Daniel unlocked the door and stepped into a space that was frozen in time, the same furniture his parents had chosen, the same artwork on the walls depicting local beaches and historical sites. The kitchenette was small but functional. The living area opened to a lanai with a view of the pool and, beyond it, glimpses of ocean. It felt like visiting a museum of his family's past, except the past was colliding with the present in ways museums didn't typically allow. He set his bag on the couch and checked his phone. No response from Jennifer yet, though the read receipt showed she'd opened his email 17 minutes ago. He imagined her reading it, the initial confusion giving way to panic, showing it to Greg, both of them trying to calculate how much Daniel knew and what his endgame was. Let them wonder. Let them experience even a fraction of the uncertainty he'd been living with since Thursday. Daniel made coffee in the kitchenette using supplies left by housekeeping. He sat on the lanai with his laptop, drafting the conversation he wanted to have while knowing conversations rarely followed scripts. The key points were clear: acknowledgement of the affair, discussion of next steps, establishment of boundaries for how they'd proceed with separation and eventually divorce. He wasn't here to beg for reconciliation or engage in dramatic scenes. He was here to close a chapter with clarity rather than letting it fester into years of resentment and litigation. An hour passed. Then another. Daniel watched the pool fill with families, kids jumping in while parents supervised from loungers. Normal vacation activities by people whose marriages weren't imploding on tropical islands. His phone finally buzzed at 10:15. A text from Jennifer: "Where are you really? What are you doing?" Not denial. Not explanation. Just questions that confirmed she'd understood his email exactly as he'd intended. Daniel typed back, "I told you." Unit 247. Kie Breeze. I'll wait until noon. Come alone or don't come at all. He sent it and silenced his phone, refusing to engage in text negotiation. She knew where he was. She knew what he knew. Now she had to decide whether to face it or run from it. Either choice would tell him something useful about who she'd become and how they'd proceed from here. At 11:30, there was a knock on the door. Soft, almost tentative, so different from the confident way Jennifer usually announced her presence. Daniel stood from the lanai chair and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob, taking one breath to center himself. Then he opened it. Jennifer stood in the hallway wearing the sundress from the pool, her hair pulled back, her face showing the strain of someone who'd just had their carefully constructed lie exposed. Behind her, the hallway was empty. She'd come alone, as requested. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small in a way he hadn't heard in years. Daniel stepped back, gesturing her inside. She entered slowly, looking around the unit like she was seeing it for the first time even though they'd stayed here multiple times as a family. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe her affair had required forgetting a lot of things. He closed the door and they stood in the living room, two people who'd shared 15 years of marriage now facing each other across a space that felt vast despite the modest square footage. Daniel waited for her to speak first, giving her the opportunity to set the tone. She deserved that much, even if she deserved very little else. "How did you know?" Jennifer finally asked, her eyes meeting his briefly before looking away. "Does it matter?" Daniel replied. "I know. That's enough." She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive posture that made her look younger and more vulnerable than she probably wanted. "It's not what you think," she began, and Daniel almost laughed at the predictability of it. "It's exactly what I think," he said, keeping his voice even. "You're having an affair with Greg. You lied about this trip. You've been lying for months. Those are facts, Jennifer. Not interpretations." She flinched at the directness of it. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "That's the thing about choices," Daniel said. "They happen because we make them. You chose this. You chose him. You chose to lie to me, to Emma, to your employer. Those were all decisions, not accidents." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, though whether from genuine remorse or getting caught, Daniel couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. "I wasn't happy," she said, like unhappiness was justification. "Neither was I," Daniel replied. "But I didn't solve it by starting a relationship with someone else while pretending our marriage still existed. I tried talking. I tried asking what was wrong. You chose deception instead of dialogue." She wiped at her eyes, smudging mascara she'd probably put on for another day with Greg. "So what now? You came here to humiliate me? To ruin the trip?" "I came here because I own this property," Daniel said, gesturing at the unit around them. "And because I wanted you to know that your lies have geography. You can't compartmentalize this away. I exist in your escape. I own part of this island. And more importantly, I own the truth about what you've been doing." Jennifer's face shifted then, tears giving way to something harder. "Are you going to tell everyone? Make this public?" "I'm going to tell our daughter something honest when the time is right," Daniel said. "I'm going to tell my lawyer everything. Beyond that, I don't have interest in public drama. But I won't lie for you either. If people ask why we're divorcing, they'll get facts." The word divorcing landed between them like dropped luggage. Jennifer sank onto the couch, her composure finally cracking completely. "Just like that? 15 years and you're done?" "You were done months ago," Daniel said. "I'm just catching up." He sat in the chair across from her, maintaining physical distance that mirrored the emotional one. "I need to know the timeline. When it started. How often. Whether you've made any decisions about leaving that I should know about." Jennifer looked at him like he'd asked her to perform surgery. "Does it matter? Will details change anything?" "They'll change the divorce filing," Daniel said bluntly. "They'll change custody arrangements. they'll change how I answer Emma's questions. So yes. Details matter. For the next hour, Jennifer provided those details in fragments and half-sentences, interrupting herself with justifications and tangents that Daniel cut through with specific questions. The affair had started in March after a late working session. It had been casual at first, emotional rather than physical, whatever that distinction was worth. Physical had followed within weeks. They'd met regularly, mostly at Cedar Street apartments that belonged to Greg's brother who traveled frequently. The Hawaii trip had been Greg's idea, a way to escalate from stolen hours to full days together. Daniel listened without interrupting, taking mental notes that he'd document later. When she finished, he asked the only question that really mattered for logistics: "Are you planning to continue the relationship with Greg after this?" Jennifer hesitated, which was answer enough. "I don't know," she finally said. "This wasn't how I wanted you to find out." "There's no good way to find out your spouse is cheating," Daniel replied. "But I found out. And now we deal with consequences. You'll move out when we get back to Phoenix. We'll file for separation, then divorce. We'll work out custody arrangements that prioritize Emma's stability. And we'll do all of it as efficiently as possible because dragging it out helps no one." "You've already decided everything," Jennifer said, and there was accusation in her tone, like his decisiveness was the problem rather than her infidelity. "I decided when I read your text about Hawaii," Daniel said. "Everything since has been confirmation. You get to make decisions too, Jennifer. You get to decide whether you want to make this difficult or straightforward. But you don't get to decide whether it happens. That choice was made when you chose Greg." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window, looking out at the pool where families continued their vacations in oblivious normalcy. "What about Emma?" she asked quietly. "What about her?" Daniel replied. "She loves you. That won't change. But she'll know the truth eventually, age-appropriately, without me poisoning the well. What happens to your relationship with her depends on you. How you handle this. Whether you prioritize her needs or your own convenience." Jennifer turned from the window, her face streaked with tears and anger. "You're being cruel." "I'm being honest," Daniel corrected. "Cruel would be showing up at your hotel room with Greg there. Cruel would be calling your employer right now. Cruel would be posting this situation on social media for everyone we know to comment on. I'm not doing any of that. I'm having a private conversation in property I legally own, discussing facts that need addressing. If that feels cruel, maybe examine why truth feels like an attack." She grabbed her purse from where she'd set it by the door. "I can't do this right now." "Then go," Daniel said. "But understand that when you walk out that door, you're choosing how we proceed. Cooperatively or contentiously. I'm offering cooperative. If you reject it, we'll do contentious, and my lawyer will be far less generous than I'm being right now." Jennifer's hand was on the doorknob when she paused. "Did you ever love me? Or was this always just a transaction to you?" The question was designed to wound, to make him the villain in whatever story she was telling herself. Daniel let it hang for a moment before answering. "I loved you enough to build a life with you. To be faithful when it was hard. To show up every day for 15 years. Love isn't a feeling, Jennifer. It's a commitment. You're the one who transacted it away." She left without another word, the door closing with a soft click that seemed too quiet for the weight of the conversation. Daniel stayed seated in the chair, listening to her footsteps descend the exterior stairs, hearing a car door slam and an engine start. Then silence, broken only by the distant sounds of children playing in the pool and the gentle whir of the ceiling fan above him. He sat there for a long time, processing what had just happened and what would happen next. The confrontation had been less dramatic than he'd imagined, more exhausting than satisfying. But it was done. The truth was out. The path forward was clear even if it wasn't easy. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened his notes app, typing everything he remembered from their conversation while it was fresh. Dates, admissions, her hesitation about ending things with Greg. All of it would matter in legal proceedings, even if it couldn't heal the damage already done. His flight back to Phoenix left Tuesday morning. He'd spend Monday afternoon making calls, scheduling appointments with divorce attorneys, preparing documents. The Maui trip that Jennifer had intended as romantic escape had become the location where her marriage officially ended. There was poetry in that, Daniel supposed, though he was too tired to appreciate it. He stood and walked to the lanai one more time, looking out at the ocean he could glimpse between buildings. His parents had loved this place, had believed in investing in small pieces of paradise that could provide memories and escape. They'd never imagined their son would use it as the setting for the hardest conversation of his life. But they'd raised him to face difficult things directly, to value truth over comfort. He'd done that today. Now he just had to keep doing it until the other side of this mess came into view. Daniel packed his few belongings and locked the unit, leaving the keys with the management office. He drove back to the airport that afternoon rather than staying another night, suddenly desperate to be home, to see Emma, to begin the practical work of rebuilding a life that made sense. The flight back to Phoenix felt longer than the flight out, time stretching in that peculiar way it does when you're traveling away from disaster rather than toward it. Emma texted during his layover in Los Angeles, asking when he'd be home and if he'd bring her something from California. Daniel promised a gift and an arrival time, neither of which felt adequate to the situation. But inadequacy was part of parenting through crisis. You did your best and hoped it was enough and accepted that sometimes it wouldn't be. By the time he landed in Phoenix late Monday night, Daniel felt hollowed out, a structure with good bones but emptied of everything that had made it a home. He drove through familiar streets to a house that would soon need dividing, its contents sorted into hers, his, and the things they'd argue about because emotion had to land somewhere. Tomorrow he'd pick up Emma. Tomorrow he'd start making calls. 3 weeks after Maui, Daniel sat across from his attorney in an office that smelled like leather and old books. The divorce papers were comprehensive, detailing asset division and custody arrangements with the precision of someone who'd done this too many times. Jennifer had hired her own lawyer, an aggressive woman who specialized in protecting unfaithful spouses from their consequences. The initial negotiations had been predictably contentious until Daniel's attorney presented the timeline, the receipts, the documented lies. After that, Jennifer's lawyer had advised cooperation. The settlement took 2 months to finalize. Jennifer moved out on a Saturday in September, her sister helping pack boxes while Daniel took Emma to a movie neither of them watched. When they returned, half the furniture was gone and the house felt like a stage between productions. Emma cried that night, asking questions Daniel answered as honestly as he could without making Jennifer the villain. Sometimes people grow apart, he said. Sometimes love isn't enough. The explanations felt inadequate even as he delivered them. Jennifer's relationship with Greg ended 3 weeks after Maui, imploding under the weight of exposure and workplace complications. The firm had launched an internal review after Daniel's attorney sent a carefully worded letter about workplace conduct. Greg was transferred to the Denver office. Jennifer stayed in Phoenix but switched firms, taking a pay cut and a title reduction that she complained about to mutual friends who no longer knew whose side to take. Daniel kept the house in primary custody. Emma spent weekends with Jennifer in a rented condo that tried too hard to feel like home. The first few exchanges were painful, brief handoffs in parking lots with minimal eye contact. Eventually they developed a rhythm, not friendly but functional, the kind of détente that divorced parents achieve when their child's well-being matters more than their own resentment. The timeshare stayed in Daniel's name. He took Emma there the following summer, just the two of them, remaking memories in a space that had witnessed the end of one chapter and the tentative beginning of another. They snorkeled and ate shave ice and talked about feelings in ways that felt harder than any business negotiation Daniel had ever conducted. Emma was resilient in the way children often are, adapting to split households and new routines with grace that humbled him. By the time the divorce was finalized, Daniel had learned that closure wasn't a destination but a process. Some days he felt free. Other days he felt cheated. Most days he felt both, holding contradictions that refused easy resolution. He dated occasionally, cautiously, aware that trust was a muscle he'd need to rebuild. Jennifer did the same, her social media showing carefully curated happiness that Daniel stopped checking after the first month. The Hawaii trip remained the fulcrum, the moment when suspicion became certainty and avoidance became action. Daniel never regretted going, never regretted the confrontation in Unit 247. Sometimes the hardest conversations were the most necessary, not because they fixed anything but because they prevented further damage. He'd stopped the bleeding. Everything after was just healing, slow and imperfect and ongoing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.